So just some context. Here's a diagram I found, randomly found, but potentially most people here are familiar with it. And it really highlights what we're talking about today. You've got the risk management process, and within that, you've got the monitoring and review. So I thought to kick off the conversation, I put some prompts here, and these are not necessarily prompts we need to talk about, but they are prompts we can use to start the conversation. And please feel free to speak up, turn your video on so we can see you, and share your viewpoint on any one of these features, any one of these questions, and ask your own questions as well. So I guess at a high level, what value are you seeing in risk monitoring? How is it being listened to at the business? Is is it meeting the objectives? What are the objectives? Would anyone like to share kind of their views on monitoring, or even questions and concerns they had that made them want to join the call today?
Good, Ben. I don't mind starting off if that's all
Oh,
right.
good on you. Thank you.
Yeah, good, Ben. Yeah, kia ora koutou. So look, really, really interesting topic. And look, I think from my perspective, so I'm based in Hamilton, and I'm GM for Risk and Assurance at Gallagher. And I suppose if I talk about our journey, and our risk management, maturity, we're still really growing, into our maturity as an organization. And part of the challenge I have is taking the organization on that journey towards more maturity. But when it comes to like risk monitoring, one of the messages I'm trying to make clear to our stakeholders, um, is around the static nature of risk reporting, right? So our risk assessments only capture risk in a moment of time, and we build a lot of assumptions around and subjectivity around how those are assessed. So I think risk monitoring is really valuable from the perspective and around, I suppose, how we define it in terms of getting an updated current opportunity to discuss where the risk is currently at, right? Because if we just go with what's in our heat maps, what's in our reports, that's likely to be out of date. So I think promoting opportunities to have those discussions. So what I'm doing now, for example, in terms of practice, is that when I'm presenting that kind of data to our audit and risk committee, to our board, or to executive leadership team, I'm giving a disclaimer that, hey, everything you're seeing here in terms of the heat maps and stuff, let's just assume it's not necessarily current, it's out of date. So let's have some discussions around, well, where these risks are currently at, and entertaining some of that communication around, we talk about risk velocity, right? So which of these risks are faster moving than others, and which of these risks are more likely to impact on us achieving our strategic objectives than others, and just trying to create that space. When giving those updates to stakeholders around having those kind of discussions to really explore the risks and what they mean, and where they're at. Are they within appetite, outside of appetite, those sorts of things. So I think to kick things off, I think challenging some of the thinking around risk management and ratings, etc., is, at least in our organization, has been a good place to start from that perspective. So there we go. I'll put that out there, and people can jump onto that or share something else.
Yeah, I'll dive in.
Thanks,
John
John.
O'Connell, just to fill the silence. Thanks, Rodney. Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I suppose. I mean, sounds pretty basic, but I think as a risk practitioners, if we don't have processes that monitor risks, then risk management will just die a death, or just be really seen as a compliance. Because as Rodney says, it's not static. Risk is obviously a dynamic thing that is a function. It relates to the fact that the organisations were in a dynamic. So if there is no, I just see risk monitoring as an essential part of keeping risk management alive and of use and of relevance. But interested to hear how people do it. So I suppose what I'm saying is that I just see it as an essential part of risk management, recognising that risk reports are static and point of time. So we just need to have ways to keep it alive, whether that's, probably different for each different types of risks, but even if it's regular updates by sort of risk owners, or if it's data gathering or more objective stuff. That's what I'd be keen to hear, I guess, in terms of how people are keeping it alive.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I mean, there often is a bit of a lag between, getting the data from stakeholders, preparing the reports, meeting the governance requirements to get some pre-reads out there to the boards, and during that time risk can change. Yeah, it's quite an interesting perspective. And in terms of the how, I guess how are people doing that process of risk monitoring, uh, and how are they finding it, keeping it alive? Are you quite traditional, risk-based, Excel-based risk register? Are you more modern with, specialist software? Do you focus operationally, or are you more strategic? Do you aggregate risks?
Hi, Ben. I'd be happy to talk to this.
Hi.
Hi, Cheryl from Livestock Improvement, again in the Waikato. Hello, Rodney. So we introduced the CAMS risk and audit software about 3 years ago. It was so great to say goodbye to our risk team managed Excel risk register, which didn't, it really did keep us in the dark ages because it wasn't dynamic. Other people couldn't look at it and understand what the risks were there. So introducing that software and building our risk register into there has enabled a few things. Number one, our control owners can test their controls in real time, and that flags up to me when things are coming through as not effective or partially effective, because then it's like, well, okay, what are you doing to fix this? So that means we can react to that in real time. We can also run that straight up the flagpole to the risk owner to say, hey, there may be an impact on your risk here because the control is not effective. We have 10 risk categories at the moment across about 400 risks. So every 18 months, we do a deep dive on each risk category with the entire senior leadership team. So they get a report of all the risks for that category, say it's brand damage, and all the controls, and they review them. And it is just amazing what they collectively and individually will call out in those sessions. Challenge each other on what are real controls, challenge each other on what they think the ratings are, and maybe they're being a bit optimistic on how well a risk is managed. And often I'll come out of there with actions for the business to go away and think about whether we actually have a gap between the risk and the controls. We also have a transformation office team which manages initiatives. So we have a really great process in there where anyone who comes to them and says, I think we need to stand up a project on doing something, their first question will be, is this addressing a risk, and is that risk already in the risk register? So it's giving us a really good real-time view of risks we might not know about. And then, yeah, in terms of other risk monitoring, we have monthly reports up to our senior leadership team on untested controls, and to our audit committee every quarter on things that are outstanding, and also how all our risks are tracking against our risk appetite.
Rodney.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, thanks, Cheryl. Good to see you again. Hey, just jumping on a couple of things that Cheryl mentioned. Two things. First of all, yeah, we also use CAMS, and one of the things you had there, Ben, in your notes was around risk aggregation. And one of the things I have appreciated about the CAMS integrated platform is that we've had the opportunity to practice using risk aggregation. So in our health and safety space, that's really got some good traction, and our health and safety committee and the chair of that committee has really quite appreciated being able to look at our health and safety risk profile from an aggregated perspective. So what I mean by that is that we simplify a group level health and safety risk, but underpinning that there's several health and safety risks that inform that. And then below that, so if you imagine 3 tiers below that, we have our regional and business unit health and safety risks, which inform that. So we've got these 3 tiers or 3 levels of aggregation where the every risk is informed by 2 or more risks underneath it. And that's been quite a really useful tool for tracking and reporting on risks, and it's getting some traction in our cybersecurity space as well. But at the moment, it's probably more of a bottom-up approach. So it's the problems with it though is it can sometimes be quite oversimplistic. So within the CAM system, for example, when you're aggregating risks, you have 2 options. One is that you can choose to calculate the aggregated risk score based on the average of the child risks, those underpinning risks, or you can pick the highest rated child risk to inform the parent risk. So those are the 2 options that you've got. It's not overly scientific or mathematical. So I think there's some limitations with it there, but it does, and it comes back to the previous comment, it does create opportunities for discussion, which I think is what risk management is all about when you're reporting on it, creating those opportunities. So our group health safety manager had some challenges trying to present what that looks like in terms of that, that hierarchy. So that's something, if anyone wants to reach out to me afterwards and talk more about how we're doing aggregation, I'm happy to have that conversation. And just the second thing as well is that there's been a real interest in the organization from last year around reporting on what we call strategic execution risks. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about those short-term 1-year business plan risks where we've got all of our business units across the organization. They draft their business plans at the start of the financial year. They identify the threats that could prevent them from achieving their objective. And then that we do an assessment of them, of those risks in terms of, well, at the moment, how much how much of a threat are they to achieve our objectives? And if the business unit executes all of their actions and plans that they want to do over the next 12 months, how's that going to reduce the risk rating? And so our business units found it a really good way to sell their business plans to the board because they say, hey, this is the risk at the moment, but hey, if we can do all of this, what we're setting out to do, then potentially this is where we can get to. So as part of their packs, there's a 1-pager I help them with, which is just a heat map, right? 5x5 heat map. You have a point where, let's say there's 5 risks on it, a point where those risks are at, and then we just draw a line from each risk, where it is now to where it will be and where we think it could be in 12 months' time, with the assumptions that these actions are undertaken, the budgets are approved, etc. So that's been a really good way, I've found, to get some engagement in that space. And in terms of our maturity journey, that's one area that the organisation is finding some value in investing some time in. So in terms of tracking those, so every quarter those things are tracked in terms of, are we getting closer towards that target risk rating for each of those objectives, or are we not? So again, it creates those opportunities for discussion along the way as well. So I suppose there's a couple of practical examples around how we're monitoring risks in the organisation.
Hey, Ben, I just had a question for Rodney off the back of that. I just wondered, sorry, Tom from Fonterra here, just wondered, Rodney, whether through that process you get feedback the other way through that discussion to say, oh, thanks for all that, and we'd actually prefer not to spend that money, or and accept that level of risk, take that level of risk because we're comfortable with that current level of risk.
Yeah. Thanks for your question. That's a really good question, Tom. What this process helped us to do, right, is 2 things. So one end of it, it's that our leaders set as an opportunity to sell their business plan. I'm just putting it bluntly, frankly, right? But the other end of it as well, and this is the bit I advocate for, it's opportunity for the board to then ask some questions. And some of the questions they come up is like, are you seriously saying if we support this, that this risk will come from a high to a low, right? And it creates those opportunities to ask those kind of questions, to challenge some of the thinking behind it, and it also creates opportunity to help focus on what the most critical areas are. So where the budget should be invested. So I suppose going back to the previous comment, when the board sees that heat map with the tracking in terms of where we are now versus what we want to be, we've found it to be a really useful to create those discussions. So not necessarily black and white, say, oh, okay, yes, well, we accept that, or no, we're not going to do it, but it creates that space to have those discussions around, you know, the reality and around the assumptions being made, but also around where the return on investment, the best return on investment is most likely to be. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but that's I suppose how it's being used and how it's having an impact on budgets and decisions when the board gets to the process of actually approving business plans.
And Tom touches on an interesting point, I guess, somewhat around risk appetite, and you know, I guess using risk monitoring as a way to check, is the business running at the risk appetite that the board would like? Is that a monitoring? Is that what lots of people do in their monitoring? Is it a comparison of where we are versus where we would like to be, or is it different?
If I just continue while I'm on screen, I think that's certainly what we do. We're trying to monitor or assess risk and monitor, and then effectively asking that question whether, you know, are we comfortable with that level. But I guess that's similar to what Rodney's doing, if it's whether it's on a heat map or you've got another kind of way of displaying it. You are providing some data and some information to then sort of go, okay, are we comfortable with this level of uncertainty or this level of risk? Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, yes, that's certainly how we think about it. Not sure if anyone else has got any builds.
Yeah, does anyone else have risk appetite kind of central to their risk monitoring?
Yep, John here again. Yes, I wouldn't say it was front and centre, but in our sort of what we call formal risk reporting that goes up through our executive team and audit committee, each risk owner is allocated a risk owner, and their question really is, as a risk owner, is firstly how big is a risk, which is sometimes subjective, sometimes objective. But is it is it acceptable? Recognizing that most risk can't be eliminated, and it shouldn't be, because you've got to live with some amount of risk, got to take some risk to achieve objectives. So the question is, is it acceptable? That is within the context of risk appetite statement, which we've chunked down into various categories. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but sort of risk averse, risk open, risk neutral, etc. for different categories. So it gets people thinking about, well, when we say this risk is too high or this risk is not too high, at least it provides some context for doing it. I mean, still work to do, but yes, in short, we do tie risk acceptability back to risk appetite. Be interested to hear if others do it or how well it works.
Here at LIC, we have a formal risk acceptance process. So whenever a risk is beyond what the risk appetite is for that category, there is a formal process. For me, it's not so much about the paper that gets recorded on, but the questions that prompts the risk owner to think about. Is it acceptable that we are in this position? Is there more that we could be doing to manage this risk better?
Sure. While you're talking, one thing I picked up from when you spoke before, it sounded like risk monitoring feeds well or plays a central part in decisions, or what happens in the business. Is that a true statement, or is it
Very
only
much.
a certain group of decisions? Or
No, absolutely. So, and I think someone earlier talked about strategic objectives and things like that, and risk is definitely central to that. If we're going to spend money on something, is this going to help us manage risk in a better way in that area? That's definitely one of the key tenets of considering where we spend our money. Not the only one. And at the same time, obviously, is spending this money helping us manage a risk better, which is, I think, the other side of the coin.
how about other people on the call? Have you found it to be more risk monitoring to be a compliance exercise, and are you happy with that? or would you like it to be more central into how decisions are made and feed into it a bit more? Is it just controls focus and improving controls, or is there more to it?
Hey Ben, I'll jump in again. Look, yeah, look, there's one thing that winds me up, Ben, is when we talk about risk management for compliance, right? Probably a lot of us as well, right, on this call. So yeah, probably like a lot of you on this call, I'm really driven to sell the concept of risk management in terms of being integral to our decision making, but also its influence on organizational performance. So I always advocate, that we're not doing risk. If we're just doing risk for compliance, it's not adding any value, right? And often I think we're familiar, if we work in those kind of contexts, it's really hard to get buy-in and engagement from stakeholders when they perceive risk as only done as a tick box exercise for the auditor, or for the regulator or whatever, to show that we're doing something in the risk space. So I think that's always the big question for all of us, is that are we adding value in the space? Are we seeing better decisions? Are we seeing greater success because effective risk management is being built into our processes?
I can just continue on there. Just a thought that's going through my head is we're talking a lot about monitoring at that kind of senior leadership or governance type level, and clearly there's monitoring of risk going on at an operational level as well. So that the way where I sort of operate is more at the monitoring to the board and our management team. And what often find is that, and this speaks to adding value or not, often find that we're monitoring risk for a particular area. Say for Fonterra, it might be around food quality risk or health and safety risk or milk supply risk, things that are relevant to our operation. And it's not necessarily new information for the people that we're presenting it to, because funnily enough, we have senior leaders in those areas as well that are very much across and own that risk and have their own kind of management reporting that goes up to a similar place. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out there as well, like that kind of, you've got business units or owners that are doing similar monitoring, that's integrating risk management into the business, which is also a good thing. But then we're sort of aggregating that across all risks, but then to provide that context across all risks, but you do get that dynamic of, oh, well, that's not really new information. And I just wonder if anyone else experiences that as well. Possibly depends on maybe the size of the business, as well as how well people think about risk in their individual areas of the business.
Tom, I think that's a really interesting comment, and I see on here we've got KRI's KPIs. So we had about 50 KPIs in place, and when I had a look at them, actually a lot of those were already being reported up in operational reports to our senior leadership team. So I've unpicked those and said, for me, a key risk indicator is really something I want the senior leadership team collectively to see, because it may impact more than one area of the business. So it's not just about the GM of Ops knowing that maybe our complaints number is up. It's actually about the whole of the senior leadership team knowing that in a particular area we're getting negative customer feedback. So yeah, it's something
just joining the dots between business units and providing that end-to-end visibility.
That lens, absolutely.
Which is certainly how I sort of think about it and go, that's the value that we create, and it's or part of the value we create, providing that information for decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I see that as an amazing benefit and a privilege for us in our roles to be able to see right across the organisation, more so than some of those senior leaders can.
Kia ora, I am Lucrecia from MV. I am not a risk person, but I do work for the enterprise compliance team. So I am somehow familiar with all those terms that you've been using, and I am leading a project of monitoring compliance with policy, with internal policies, which at the time are or in turn are linked to our operational risk. And so on the question on what's the value of monitoring compliance or actually the level of risk, which is somehow linked, what we do at the MD is just present the stage of or the status of compliance across the business to our SLT for them to inform their decision making. And regardless of whether it is aggregate or not, I guess for us, as a public service organization, we have a very low risk tolerance. And what it is important for us is what is the rating of that risk and what are we doing to manage that risk, and how do we test the controls that we have set in place for that for managing those risks. So in this project that I am leading, what we do is just go to the different business units and just test those compliance tools and see what are they experiencing, and then we inform our SLT to make the decisions in terms of whether that risk need to have more controls in place. I don't know whether that sort of brings something to the table or not, but yeah, I suppose I have a little bit of a different lens when approaching risk.
Yeah, and I think there's I guess a nice parallel and similar thing to bring to the table. And it makes me wonder, like there are many parts of the organizations doing different types of monitoring, and it kind of does speak to, somewhat the risk role.
Yeah, just I know I think we're pretty much almost out of time, and some might have to go. But just one thought that came into my mind around risk monitoring, and we're exploring a wee bit here. But you probably be familiar with the concept around the the inherent residual risk, but also the target or future risk. And one thing I've been thinking about when we talk about future risk in the context of our organisation at the moment, we're talking about where we want to get to. But I know in some organisations, when they think about future risk, is the possibility that sometimes our risk could increase, right? So sometimes we may want risk to go down, but sometimes it may go up. So I've been looking at some case studies in other organizations when they're monitoring risk, and they're actually, forecasting that, hey, this risk is actually going to, increase, or if it's a threat, get worse. And I don't know if anyone here is reporting on future risk in that way, and how that may add value or not. But it is something that I've kind of been exploring in terms of that concept of monitoring and the concept of future risk in terms of where the risk owner can see the risk moving towards in the future, which could be up or down. And just before I go too, I've shared some images or examples how we're doing some of the stuff at Gallagher, and happy afterwards if anyone wants to reach out to me to find out a bit more. I'm happy to connect on that one. So thanks, team.
I can just add to that. Slightly different lens on that. So every year we look at the global risk trends, the report that comes out of the Global Risk Summit, and we align that and we have a look at our own risk register and we say, how are we assessing that risk versus what we're seeing these 300-400 people around the world they seeing that risk, and what does that mean to our business? And it helps us to look outside sometimes. So you go back 3 years, maybe AI popped up. Well, LIC wouldn't have thought about the risks of AI at that point. So it just again prompts that discussion that I have with the leadership team to say, have we thought about AI? Is it already happening in our business or to our business? Is it a risk to us because our competitors might be using it? Do we need to start tracking this risk and think about who should be thinking about it?
Interesting. Yeah. The just on that point, Rodney, around future risks. I guess I personally see that as somewhat the gold standard of risk management, getting foresights instead of insights. And I guess on this piece of paper, I put risk adjusted KPIs. And it's kind of what you're saying. It's almost projecting where your company will be at a certain point in time, considering, the risks that can occur. And I work at Fonterra with Tom, and we are a seasonal business. As a grass grows more milk gets produced. And I guess with the kind of seasonality, it's something we've naturally do and naturally can do is look forward a bit more and try and adjust our monitoring to be a bit more forward looking. One example I could talk about is say you have intuitively we know this, but say at the start of a year you have one serious harm incident, and you kind of in your head forecast what it will be at the end of the year. But then in the second month of the year you have five. Well, then your forecast of or where you think you'll be at the end of the year is suddenly looking a lot worse. So there's two ways kind of people seem to address this as kind of do it with a risk score or qualitatively describe that. But the other approach is to do it quantitatively and talk about, based on our future risk projection, we're going to end up with, uh, between 3 and 10 serious harms for the end of the year. So I think, that sometimes there's tendency to report on things that have happened and things that are happening. But the value of reporting on what may happen and providing a range and discussing the future is, I think, where the majority of the value is for risk monitoring.
Yeah, it's providing those insights, right, Ben, and even going back to that thing of future risk trajectory. Sometimes we find out that our controls weren't as effective, right, as we thought they were, or we've missed controls, or there are the new things that we learn, as Cheryl touched on, that may be external, outside of our control, right, which can change that trajectory. So, being able to provide those insights can really, I think, add some value in terms of decision making in our organisations if we're able to capture those and present those.
From people's experience, in terms of rating risks, and let's take a typical risk matrix, how have people found value in, I guess, a single risk matrix for each part of the organization, or a single risk matrix for the whole organization? Or, how do you kind of touch on the aggregation point? How have you kind of treated that problem?
I think I do prefer a consistent way of rating risk across the organization, because that gives them a better view to the ECLT in terms of the level of risk. And also it gives the ECLT a good idea on which part of the business or which areas of the business are sort of hosting a higher level of risk, and then controls can be set fit for purpose for that area, and not necessarily affecting or decreasing the operational ability of other parts of the business. That is my view. In terms of risk aggregation, I am in two minds in terms of what we should be reporting. Should we be reporting at the highest level identified across the business, or should we be reporting in real aggregation? Because it's going to, it gives you two different sets of information, I suppose, and which is the most valuable for decision making.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an answer to that little problem.
I have a comment, but I wouldn't say I have an answer. So I guess for me, I manage enterprise risk, and therefore our risk matrix is set up against enterprise. So when an individual raises a risk in the business, I'm always challenging them think about how this sits against the entire enterprise, because obviously we're just going to get a lot of overstatement of risk, and some of it might just relate to 5% of the business.
the same sort of thing here, I guess, is that ideally when you're making enterprise level decisions, you want consistency in how risk is being both assessed, but also like rated, if you like. And otherwise, you're not comparing apples with apples. Goes without saying, I guess. But then I guess that there's that trade-off between making sure people are sort of looking at risks and understanding them, and then if they don't think that it is significant, if it's not, it may not be significant at an enterprise level, but it is still something that they should be thinking about. And so we want to make sure that we don't put people off identifying things just because it's not, shining great big red. Hey, I need funding to, what we're trying to do is separate the risk assessment and the analysis from the actual decision being made. Just because something's being assessed as, quite a low risk in the scheme of things doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed, because maybe it's actually quite cheap to address and it makes sense on its own to do that. So it's that kind of thing that we are trying to strive for, but also change is quite hard when people have been doing things a particular way. And so because I guess in Fonterra we have very large business, but also built up over time by lots of smaller businesses or co-ops, and so different ways of doing things over years and decades. Hard to then just go, okay, we're just going to do this one way and we want a single risk matrix, for example. So yeah, same challenges, I guess, that I see people on camera at least nodding.
Yeah, I think we've probably got maybe 6 different risk frameworks at Gallagher, because there's not a one size. And I'm just reiterating basically what's being said, right? There's no one size fits all in terms of the context, right? So if we imagine, our project teams trying to use an enterprise risk framework to assess their projects, probably nothing would be very high because nothing would cross over, like 15 million for a low level risk, right? So it's been part of my job to try and get these different areas set up with the appropriate kind of risk framework, risk matrix that suits their needs. Another good example is in our product safety team. They use a UK risk assessment methodology called RAPEX, which is really highly quantitative, technical. It does, trying to fit that into an enterprise risk management framework just doesn't work at all, but it serves serves their needs really well. So I'm quite an advocate of having bespoke frameworks to serve a purpose and to help people make stakeholders make decisions that are appropriate contextual to where that risk sits.
Rodney, does that make it hard from an aggregation perspective then for you? Do you have to do a whole bunch of manual stuff on a bit of paper?
Yeah, it does.
Or is CAM,
Yeah, it makes it really hard, right? Because like you said, I think you're not comparing apples with apples. So this is why I think I shared in the chat, we're looking at, we've been piloting an objective-centric approach to risk management. We're focusing on what's our objective, and then how confident are we going to achieve that based on the risk profile that underpins it. But yeah, really hard to aggregate. And I mean, aggregation as a concept sounds nice. And I think I've shared an example what that looks like in one of our spaces. But to really make it work, and the weighting, for example, how much weight do you assign to different risks, the calculation, if you really want to do it, and you can give me too overly scientific, and then I think you can miss the whole point of risk management and monitoring in terms of providing an opportunity to stimulate some discussions and make some decisions, as opposed to just taking at face value what's presented and reading too much into that.
Yeah, I think whenever we aggregate anything, it's always medium or amber at a high level, and then the devil's in the detail.
For those that have got systems, I guess what barriers or implementation or challenges have you found? Because clearly that's a great way to, if we compare it to the more traditional approach of a Excel risk register, it's clearly a good way to feed in information or monitoring.
The key benefit that we've found at LIC is that it just moved the whole perception away from the risk team manage risk to it's your name in the system, therefore you own it and you're responsible. Anyone in LIC, so we've got 900 odd permanent staff and about another 2,000 seasonals. Any permanent staff member can go into the system and raise a risk. And that has made a massive difference to breaking down some of the barriers about people thinking they have to work through their leadership structure in order to get a risk acknowledged. Now it just comes straight to me and I pick up the phone and go, okay, tell me more. Let's, coming back to the earlier discussion, let's think about the significance of this risk in terms of the organisation. And even, yep, okay, maybe it doesn't quite meet the criteria to be in here, but can I support you in identifying how you manage this risk better? So yeah, certainly had a massive change in terms of people understanding where risk is owned and managed.
Do they equally, is there a good connection between, I guess, identifying risks at that low level and kind of the people seeing what's done about them if there is a problem? Do they see the value in their reporting, identifying?
I think definitely. Certainly when they want to get something fixed, so they want to get an initiative off the ground and it helps with their business case, definitely those people are super keen to engage. And see the outcomes and, hopefully in 6 or 1 year's time, able to actually come back and say, you know what, we can reduce the rating on that risk now because we're managing it so much better. That's, you sort of look at them and they have that, I've really done something for LIC, which is great. And sometimes it's changed their day-to-day reality of things they had to do as well.
Oh, wonderful. I guess in terms of areas of improvements, what are people seeing as the area they can improve their risk monitoring? Is there anything in particular? Is it getting buy-in? Is it, focusing less on controls? What are some areas for improvement people have identified?
I'll jump in, Ben. I think I shared at the start in terms of our risk management maturity is still quite low. But one of the areas I want to explore with the business is around, and you touched on, I think one of your slides was around key risk indicators. I think that can put us in a better, more proactive, position to manage threats and opportunities in that space. So it's part of the strategy for us to fit that in, but being really clear that when we're identifying those key risk indicators, that they are true leading risk indicators, not lagging ones, and ones that are things that won't actually help us to identify and manage risks. So that's an area that we're exploring, and I'm keen to catch up with anybody who's using that successfully in their organisations as well.
Yeah, we I guess at Fonterra we do have quite a lot of KRIs, KCIs, and that sort of stuff, and I'm sure, yeah, we could connect around that. It's an interesting question in itself around. I guess we've had many questions around, some areas. Let's take financial markets, health and safety, where you have quantifiable things, a KRI, KCI, things are great. What do you do when you're talking about something more qualitative, geopolitical, the politics in general, regulation? It becomes an interesting conversation around, is it lead or lag? Is this actually correlated to the risk event occurring? And we've found lots of value in kind of bow tie approaches to trying to establish and understand these relationships and the interrelationships around these sorts of factors. And obviously, trending of KRIs over time is an interesting risk monitoring thing to see in reports and challenging, what is unusual versus what is usual in terms of what the key risk indicator should be. Are there any dying questions anyone's had kept them up at night around risk monitoring? Or maybe it's not something you think about in the middle of the night. Maybe it is.
couple of things you touched on there, Ben, and with some of the session we've talked about some of the tools, and some of you, what I'm about to say, some of you may disagree, which is fine, but I think whether it's quantitative or qualitative, when we're presenting risk, there is both approaches, right, and ways of assessing presenting risk have benefits, but they also have downfalls as well. And one of the behind both is big assumptions, right, that are made that can limit the usefulness of presenting quantitative or qualitative risk. So therefore, my conclusion around that is that it's the discussion that those tools promote that's probably the most important thing, and really unpacking what that means and having those challenging conversations. What are your assumptions? Is this actually correct? How do we get to that rating? Are there things that have been overlooked? I think that's for me anyway, my journey so far, that's probably one of the key takeaways. And just the other thing too as well, when you're looking at risk trends, it's interesting. Sometimes I know every year, right, January, every year, or February every year, all of these organizations put out the trends report for 2025 or 2026.
Yeah.
Some of them are good, but I was challenged recently to look back at the previous years and how accurate are they in actually predicting. So what, I don't know, the World Economic Forum or what Deloitte or what PwC said for 2023 and what they predicted for 24, did it play out or not? And how that compared to previous years. Some of them are a lot more reliable than others. Some of them things that's never eventuated, and some of them, are what we call like the grey rhino risks, right? That we know that, okay, there's a risk this year is going to be climate change and natural disasters. Well, tell me something I don't know, right? There's a risk there might be wars. Okay, or there'll be inflation because yeah. So some of those insights in terms of risk trends sometimes aren't very, or at least for my opinion, aren't very insightful. So.
Rodney, I hear what you're saying, and it's interesting because the CFO and I had this exact discussion 2 weeks ago about the World Economic Forum report this year, because the number one risk is war, right? Regional conflict. But I guess it just depends on what business you're in and where you operate in the world, how important that risk is to you. So that's the lens that I brought to that. For us, we import things from Europe, so we do need to think about what's going on, but we're not so impacted maybe in terms of the markets that we sell into.
Just in defence of Rodney, I'd probably roll my eyes just as much at those reports, but I still read them because everyone else reads them, board of directors reads them, so it's useful but often you think, okay, there's these top 10 risks. I probably could have named them as well, maybe not in the same order, but it does, I guess, Cheryl, to your point, it does get you thinking about, oh yeah, how could this apply to me? And it may help you if you do things like some intentional strategic scenario analysis, for example, and go, okay, let's play out a scenario. What if this happened? What would we do? Type thing, and that's part of risk analysis, right? That's the way that you might do some risk analysis. That may help inform which ones you decide to maybe pull the thread on a little bit more. So yeah, I agree. In summary.
Yeah, we do run a crisis simulation every year, so that's certainly one of the other reasons I look at those trend reports.
Yeah. And just, we got 3 minutes. I thought we'd end on something controversial. Opportunities. What are people, monitoring controls is commonplace and bread and butter somewhat for risk management at protecting value. Have people merged into the opportunity space in monitoring or got any traction in it, or don't consider it a space?
I think definitely should be a space, Ben. I mean, it's the other side of the coin, isn't it? In terms of risk management, one's threats, the other's opportunities. And I was reminded recently that every successful organisation is the key behind their successes have taken a risk. So I think if we're not identifying opportunities or helping the organisation to identify opportunities, then we're only really doing half our job. But I think the challenge we all have, right, is around, well, how do we do that and how do we capture that in the frameworks that we've got? Because most of these frameworks are all driven from a threat perspective, right, of risk identification and reporting. So even the tools we got, I mean, Cheryl and I, we both use CAMS. It's great for reporting on threat threat risk assessment, not so good if you truly want to assess opportunities, right? So I think that's a constraint that we have in our profession in general, at least in the enterprise risk management space, that it's some challenges around capturing, assessing, reporting on opportunity risk.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say opportunities is something that we sort of monitor, but we do monitor upside risk. So where there are places or areas of risk where we do want to take risk, we do make sure that we are looking at the tolerance ranges of the indicators that we are sort of monitoring and going, do we want to push that up a bit in areas that we do want to take risk, like whether that be the balance of our innovation portfolio? Is that geared to some actual high risk projects as opposed to just low risk course that's going to fly, or how we're hedging FX or commodity price risk? We want to take an appropriate amount of risk, and there could be, if you're monitoring that, which our teams do, and then we do as well. If you're monitoring that, there could be instances where you go, hey, we could actually take advantage of these global dynamics or whatever, and get some more margin here. Let's do that type thing, and that's monitoring and then capitalizing and capturing some upside by perhaps taking a bit more risk.
Yeah, I guess to mention the obvious is the risk of adopting AI, and what are the risks that are linked to the adoption of AI, and when do you feel comfortable enough that you are okay or comfortable with the risk that you are taking by adopting AI and making your business more efficient. I guess we're still thinking about it, and what's the best way to incorporate that in a public service organization.
Yeah. Hey, thanks everyone for your participation today. Just noting the time, it's just on 1:30, so I'll wrap it up. But it's been really interesting to hear people's views, and hopefully you've got something out of today, and if not, made some connections with people you can connect with and talk more about after. If you do have any ideas on a topic you're interested in or would like to discuss, or something you'd like Risk New Zealand to help answer or provide guidance on, please reach out. Please let me know, and that's something we can organize. And apart from that, thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Thanks,
Thanks,
Ben.
Ben.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.